Supplementary information, your travels, also known as Form 5562, or as my mom likes to suspiciously ask, even though I was just in the next room, where were you? So if you're sponsoring your spouse for permanent residence of Canada and your spouse is currently living outside of Canada, then depending upon which country they are living in, they may need to fill this form out. So in this video, we'll cover how to know if you need to fill this form out, where to find this form, who should fill this out, how to correctly fill this form out, and finally how to submit this online. So get your passports ready, let's begin. Alright, so the first step is to get to this page, sponsoring your spouse, partner or dependent child. I'm going to link it in the description below, so click and follow along. So this is the page where, based on what you enter, you will get a list of forms that you must submit in the sponsorship application. Alright, so if I scroll down, under who are you sponsoring, you'll select obviously my spouse. For what country the person being sponsored reside in, we are going to look at a couple of scenarios. Number one, let's look at this scenario where the applicant resides in India. So this becomes an outland family sponsorship where the sponsor is in Canada and the applicant is in India. Okay, so you're going to select India. Then it asks, do you need to submit documents issued by another country? So yes, your passport is Indian. If you were married in India, your marriage certificate would be Indian and your Aadhaar card would be Indian. So you will have to select India here. Okay, so select India again and then click on Get Checklist and Forms. So it gives you all the forms that need to be submitted for this sponsorship application. But if you scroll down under country specific requirements, it mentions this form 5562, which means the applicant will have to fill this form out and submit this. All right. Okay, so let's look at the next scenario. Let's assume that the person being sponsored is an Indian national, but they are living in Canada. So the sponsor is also in Canada. The person being sponsored is also in Canada. So this becomes an inland sponsorship application. All right. So under this section, what country does the person being sponsored reside in? You are going to select Canada, because if you click the question mark, it says this is the country the person is currently living in. All right. And it may be different from the country they are citizens of. So in this case, the applicant is the citizen of India, but they are currently in Canada. So you're going to select Canada. Now this section still remains India because your passport is still Indian, you're a citizen of India, and your birth certificate, marriage certificate, your national identification card, Aadhaar card will still remain Indian. So this remains India. Now this is Canada, this is India, and now you click on Get Checklist and Forms. And if you scroll down, as you see, the form 5562 disappears. You still have to provide other country specific documents for India, and it's all mentioned here, including national identity documents and birth certificates, but the form 5562 disappears. So this means that if you're an Indian national living in Canada being sponsored by your spouse, you don't have to provide information on 5562. Okay, and the reason that could be because once you applied for your tourist visa or temporary resident visa or your work permit in Canada, you must have already submitted your travel information. I know for a fact that when you submit your application for temporary residence under Schedule 1, also known as Form 5257B, you provide information about your travel history. So the Canadian government already has your history if you are in Canada. All right, so you don't need to provide Form 5562. All right, it specifically applies to Indian nationals who are being sponsored and are currently in India, which means they are part of the outland family sponsorship. All right, so let's look at a couple more scenarios. Let's say you are an Indian national, the applicant is the Indian national who is currently living in the United States. All right, so you'll select United States. Under what country does the person being sponsored reside in? And under this section, you will still select India because you're an Indian national. So your passport, national identification document, birth certificate is all Indian. And then you'll click on Get Checklist and Forms. And if I scroll down, as you see, again, you don't need the 5562 form. Okay. So if you're living in the United States of America being sponsored by your sponsor who is in Canada and you're an Indian national, you don't need to provide 5562 as per the instructions on this checklist. Okay, you still have to provide other documents for India, such as identity documents and birth certificates, but you don't need to provide 5562. Let's look at another example. Let's say you were living in United States of America and you're also a citizen of United States of America, being sponsored by your Canadian spouse, okay, who's in Canada. So it's an outland sponsorship. So you'll select United States here and you are going to click on Get Checklist. So all the other forms remain the same, but you don't have any 5562 requirement. You don't even have the requirement for identity documents or birth certificates in this situation. All right. So that is why always refer to this page based on your country of residence and country of nationality. Your requirement for 5562 will be determined. Okay. So as you can see, the 5562 information is specific to the country which you are currently living in. Okay. It's not really specific to the country of nationality, but the country that you are currently living in. So if you're living in United Arab Emirates, you definitely have to provide 5562, even if you were a citizen of United States. So if I were to select United States here, which means all my other national identity documents are from the US, but I'm currently living in United Arab Emirates. And if I click on Get Checklist, as you can see, I still have to provide 5562. So depending on what country you are currently residing in, your requirement for 5562 or supplementary travel information is determined. So if this page does not tell you to submit this 5562, there is really no need to submit this in my opinion. But if you still want to submit this, I don't think there is any harm in submitting that. The online portal is going to allow you to submit that. But use your best judgment to decide if you really want to submit this, even if the page doesn't tell you. If you're confused, then the best option is to call IRCC and verify. But I would say if this page is telling you under country specific requirements to submit this form, only submit it then. If it doesn't say that, then you can leave it. All right. Okay, so for the purpose of this video, let's assume that you are the applicant who's in India and you're being sponsored by your spouse who is in Canada, who's a permanent resident or citizen of Canada. So in that case, because you, the applicant, is in India, currently residing in India, you will need to fill this form out. All right. So now there's two ways to fill this out. If you're applying offline, then you'll have to download this PDF form, fill this out, and then send it along with your application packet. And if you're submitting the application online, which would be the recommended route, then you can simply log into your permanent residence online portal and fill this form online. This is a digital form online. So there's no PDF, no barcode, no validation required. You don't even require the validation or barcode for the offline version, but you may need to sign the offline form if you are submitting offline. So do the online route, it's easy to manage, all right? So to fill this form digitally online, what you'll do is you'll log into your permanent residence online application. If you don't know what the online portal is, or if you haven't created the application yet, check out this video that should be showing up on the cards here. Also in the description below, I explain everything about the online permanent resident portal, all right? So on your application, you are going to scroll down until you get to the form section. This is where you'll locate the form 5562, supplementary information, your travels. Okay. So as you say, there's no upload button next to the form. It's a digital form. So you'll see a start button if this is the first time you are logging in and filling this form out. Because I've already done some edits in the form before, that's why it says edit. Otherwise, it's going to say start. Okay. So you click on start. And then it gives you basic instructions on how to fill this form out. Okay. So it says that the principal applicant must complete this form. You must complete all sections about your spouse or common law partner and each dependent child over the age of 18. And this is what confuses a lot of people. So we are going to look at that in a second. So basically you will have to fill information for all your trips that you've taken outside your home country, in this case outside of India for the applicant, in the last 10 years or since your 18th birthday, whichever is more recent. So this is fairly straightforward. And then you'll include the reason for all those trips. Examples are given right here, fairly straightforward. Now this is the section which confuses a lot of people. It says you, the principal applicant, must fill out this form for yourself and on behalf of any of your family members 18 years of age or older who are not already Canadian citizens or permanent residents. All right. So what this means, what I understand from this is, if you, the applicant, is filling this form out, then your sponsor who's in Canada, they don't need to fill information in this form, because clearly it says who are not already Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Because your sponsor is a permanent resident or Canadian citizen, they don't really need to fill this form out. So this is primarily an applicant form to be filled by the applicant. But then you may argue that, Suyash, clearly up top it says this includes, if applicable, those for your spouse or common law partner. So does this spouse mean the applicant's spouse, which in this case would be the sponsor? Also, section B of this form specifically asks for information of travel about your spouse. So what does that mean? Does that mean that is the sponsor's information? And if that is the case, why should I not fill it out? So that is where the confusion is. So my understanding and the research that I've done tells me that this spouse is not the sponsor, okay? Because this form is meant to be filled only by the applicant and any dependents on the applicant, not the sponsor who's already in Canada as a permanent resident or citizen. So don't get confused. This form is supposed to be filled out only by the principal applicant. If you're still wondering what the spouse is, basically what this means is, let's say if a couple is migrating together, when can that happen? Let's assume a scenario. Let's assume you are in Canada as a permanent resident or citizen and you're sponsoring your parents. So both your parents are in India, are being sponsored. There is one principal applicant in that application, let's say your dad, and your mom is going to be the dependent on that application. So when your dad, the principal applicant, fills out the information, supplementary travel information, because they are in India, he will have to fill this out. He is going to add the supplementary travel information of his spouse, which means your mom, and that is what this spouse is for, okay? So because this is a generic application form for supplementary travel information, it can apply to many permanent resident applications, not just the spousal sponsorship. That is why the option of spouse or common law partner is kind of generic. It does not apply in the case of you being sponsored by your spouse who is already a permanent resident or Canadian citizen. So don't fill information about your sponsor based on the instructions. But if you feel that no, it says spouse, so yes, you're wrong, your understanding is incorrect, I must provide the information for my husband who is in Canada, then provide the information for the sponsor. I don't think it should hurt your case because it's just travel information. If you are providing information, make sure it is correct and agrees with your passport stamps, okay? I just told you my understanding. I found the same information online and people have explained very clearly online. You can actually go look this information up, that this spouse does not mean your sponsor, okay? So use your judgment, use your logic, and make the decision that best agrees with you, okay? So let's move on. Let's start filling this out. Okay, so the first section is principal applicant, which means yourself, and the first part is your full name. And the instructions are clearly outlined. Enter all names in English and in your native language or script. Alright, so I've made a detailed video explaining how to provide names in your native script, and it should be showing up on the cards here and also linked in the description below. It's called Technical Issues with the Online Portal. I talk about most commonly asked questions with the online portal, and native script is one of them. So go check that video out if you're looking for details on how to write names in native language. But right now I'm just going to give you a very quick shortcut, not technical at all, but very easy for any operating system, any device, okay? So the first thing you'll do is you'll write your family name here. So let's say I write my last name here, Gautam, okay? And then I will have to write the same last name in my native script, which is Hindi. So my best option is to go to Google and simply type English to Hindi translate, okay? And this page is going to open up. This is where I'm going to enter my name, Gautam in English, okay? And it translates in Hindi, all right, which is my native script. And you can select any language you want here, and it is going to translate your name in English into your native script. So you can select Swedish, you can select Tamil, you can select Russian, and it is pretty close. Sometimes what it does is once you translate, it ends up with a colon or a kind of punctuation next to the name. Let me show you how that works. So this is my last name. It translated the last name correctly. That is how it's written in Hindi. I'm going to click on these two double boxes. It will copy the translation to the clipboard. Then I go back to the permanent resident portal and I simply paste it here. And my last name is written in English and in the native script. Now let's look at my first name. So if I type Suyaash, which is my first name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this Google translation page, make sure English to Hindi is selected because that's the translation I want. And I'm simply going to type in Suyaash, my first name here. And as you can see, it translates into Hindi with just this colon as the additional punctuation, which is not really required. But that's not a problem because what I can do is I can simply click the double boxes to copy Suyash in Hindi onto the clipboard, come back here, paste it, and then remove these colon in the edit. Okay, so that's how it's done. You can do this with any language. All right, so there's a bunch of languages out here. Just type in your name as you would in English here, select the language you want to translate it into. It will do the translation. Simply click the double boxes to copy it, come back here and paste it. And this is how you will list the names in this 5562 form. Okay. Alright, so now that we are done with the name, let's look at the rest of the form. List all trips you have taken outside of your country of origin or of residence in the last 10 years. So it says if you need to add more than 200 trips, please upload the information for trips 201 plus in the supporting documents table on the application page. If you've flown outside of India 200 times in the last 10 years, which would only be the case if you're really a travel enthusiast and have a lot of money or you work in the airline industry. So it's very common for air hostesses or air stewards to travel that many times in 10 years, okay? They actually do these many trips in 1 year. So if your trips are more than 200, this form is not going to allow you to add more than 200 trips. So then what you're going to do is simply add all the rest of the trips beyond 200 in a Word document in the same format or in a tabular format and just upload it under the supporting documents table. So this is the supporting documents on your application page for the online portal. If you scroll down, you can upload this under other, okay? Just label that 201 plus trips or something with the right labeling instructions. All right. So if you did not travel outside of India or outside of your country of residence or origin, just check this box and simply save and continue and move along, and your application and your form is done. All right. And it doesn't mean that if you did not travel, you don't need to submit this form. You simply have to check this box, but you will have to submit this form with your name typed in. All right. But let's assume you did travel. So you're going to list your trips in the reverse chronological order. Okay, so from the most recent to the oldest. So let's say one example, you went to Spain in April of 2020. All right, although it's not really possible because it was COVID, but let's just assume for purpose of learning, and you only went for 6 days. So because you only went for 6 days and you have to list the dates in the year and month format, you're simply going to list 2020 April here also, because your trip was confined within the 6 days of April. All right, destination city was Madrid, Spain. That's how you list it. And let's say you went for 6 days, so just list 6 days. Purpose of travel, tourism. And that's how you'll complete this section. If you have more trips, simply click on add another and just keep adding these details in the same format as we added here. All right, it's as simple as that. So once you've done the details about the principal applicant, section A, then you click on save and continue and you move on to section B, which is your spouse or common law partner. As we discussed, this is not your sponsor, so you can simply write not applicable anywhere here. Don't write it here, otherwise it's not going to accept not applicable in the date field. So write NA anywhere in this section and just move on. If you're being sponsored by your child as a parent, then you can provide the information about your spouse here as well. Okay. And if you're being sponsored by your spouse in Canada who's a permanent resident and you still feel the need to provide information, go ahead and provide all the travel information about your sponsor here. Okay. But according to instructions, it's not really required. Shouldn't hurt your case, even if you provide it. So once you're done, hit save and continue. Move on to section C. This is where you provide information of travel about your dependent children who are 18 years or older. Okay, so if they're younger than 18 years, you don't really need to provide information about your dependent children. But if they're over 18 or 18, then you'll have to provide their travel information here as well. All right, so do that and then click on complete and return to application, and that will complete this form. All right, so once you hit complete, that form is going to be ready to be submitted. So you're going to get to this page again, and it's just going to show ready to submit. So once you are done with the rest of the forms, you simply submit this application, and this form is going to get submitted along with the rest of the forms. All right, and by the way, I feel silly telling this to you, but to find out the exact date of your travel when you entered and exited a port of entry, just use your passport. It should have stamps for entry and exit, so all your international travel gets recorded on your passport. If your passport has expired since the last time you traveled internationally and you've renewed your passport since, and you don't have the old passport, just look into your email. You should have some sort of document, boarding pass, a flight, an itinerary that should give you a rough idea about the time that you actually took a trip. If you don't have anything, use your memory to find out the closest date that you took a trip in. Usually people do not forget international trips. Okay, so as long as you're close to the actual date that you took your international trip, you should be fine. Remember, the immigration officer already has the capacity to find out how many international trips you've taken. Okay, they can get that information. So it's advisable to provide the information as accurately and correctly as possible. All right, and it's not really required as part of the spousal sponsorship application, but if you want, you can actually attach all those supporting documents. So you can attach your passport scan for all the entry and exit stamps that your passport must have if you've traveled internationally. You can even attach your flight tickets or boarding passes just as proof of your travel history that you will list in the 5562. You don't need to, but you can if you want. It wouldn't hurt. All right. Okay, so that was all about travel history. As you saw, this is a pretty easy form to fill out, but you'll be surprised how many applications get rejected because people skip this one. Don't make that mistake. Document your travels and submit this form correctly. Eliminate the chances of rejection. This is Suyash from Hit Submit and Canada, and if you're watching this video in November, then I wish you a very happy and prosperous Diwali. May the warmth of family and friends lighten up your festival this year. And for those sponsors in Canada who are waiting for their spouses in India, make sure your heating works correctly. For now, that is the only warmth you'll get. Good night.